The Shattered Sanctuary, Liana's Trial by Fire. Welcome to the truth. Before we dive into this chilling, powerful tale, we ask for one favor. Subscribe to our channel, hit the like button on this video, and drop your comments below. Your support helps us share more powerful accounts of resilience like this one. The sound that shattered Lydia's world, the sound that shattered Lydia Sterling's world, wasn't the crystal vase smashing on the floor, its fragments scattering across the polished marble like fallen stars. It wasn't the vicious, hissing secret of a man who wasn't hers, spoken by her husband's lips. It was the sickening, wet crack of his open palm connecting with her cheek. One moment, she was a woman in her third trimester of pregnancy, standing in the palatial living room she had personally helped design, pleading for the life she thought she had. The next, she was on the ground, a searing pain eclipsing her shock, her hands instinctively flying to protect the precious life within her. And as her husband, Marcus Harrington, loomed over her, shielding his mistress with his body, Lydia knew her life was irrevocably broken. But no one in that silent, sterile courtroom months later could have predicted how she would put herself back together. The golden cage. The perfect lie. Lydia Sterling's life had been a meticulously constructed work of art. Her marriage to Marcus Harrington was the centerpiece of a portrait of modern success. Marcus was a charismatic financial analyst on the fast track to a partnership at a prestigious firm on Wall Street, New York. He was handsome, ambitious, and possessed a confidence that bordered on arrogance, a trait Lydia once mistook for strength. Their home was an expansive 3-bedroom apartment overlooking Central Park, a symphony of glass, steel, and muted tones that Lydia, with her architectural design background, had personally curated. Every morning, she woke to the soft light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city humming a familiar tune below. She brewed Marcus's coffee, a specific, single-origin Colombian blend, freshly ground, and they sat on their minimalist balcony, a silent ritual that felt increasingly hollow. In the early days, those mornings were filled with shared dreams and laughter. Now, they were punctuated by the tap, tap, tap of Marcus's thumb on his phone screen, his answers to her questions becoming monosyllabic grunts. "Late again, Marcus?" she asked one Tuesday morning, her voice soft as she placed a hand on her swollen belly. The baby, a girl they had decided to name Sophia, kicked in response. "It's a monster deal, the Gallardos," he replied, not looking up from his screen. "You wouldn't understand the pressure." That phrase, "you wouldn't understand," had become his favorite refrain. He used it to dismiss her worries about his drinking, his growing emotional distance, his nights that stretched into dawn. He had once celebrated her intellect and her eye for design. Now he treated her as if the pregnancy had emptied her brain, leaving only domestic concerns. She had given up a promising career at a boutique architecture firm when he insisted it was time to focus on family, a sacrifice she made willingly, believing it was an investment in their shared future. The cracks were there, fine as a spider's web on glass. Marcus's older, kinder colleague, Mr. Davies, had pulled her aside at a company gala a month earlier. "He's a brilliant fellow, Lydia," Mr. Davies had said, his eyes filled with a pity she didn't then grasp. "But brilliance can cast very dark shadows. Be careful." Then there were the financial discrepancies. Lydia managed the household accounts. She noticed charges at restaurants she'd never heard of, bills from luxury boutiques where she never shopped. When she questioned him, Marcus's response was a wave of condescending anger. "Are you my wife or my accountant, Lydia? It's client entertainment. It's the cost of doing business. I am building a life for us, for our daughter. The least you could do is trust me." He made her feel small, paranoid. She began to doubt her own instincts, chalking up her unease to pregnancy hormones, just as he suggested. She clung to the image of the man she had married, the one who had recited poetry on their third date and held her for hours after her mother's funeral. She told herself that man was still in there, buried under layers of stress and ambition. The baby would bring him back. Sophia would be their anchor, their renewal. Her best friend, Jasmine Kaur, a sharp-minded journalist who had never been charmed by Marcus, saw things more clearly. "He's manipulating you, Lydia," Jasmine had said over tea a week before the incident. "He closes a $1 million deal and celebrates by buying a $5,000 client watch. Who is this client? And why is the charge coming from a lingerie shop on Fifth Avenue?" Lydia flinched, defending him reflexively. "You don't know him like I do. He's under immense pressure. The pressure of being a decent human being and a faithful husband shouldn't be that immense," Jasmine retorted, her dark eyes flashing with frustration. "Open your eyes before he slams the door in your face." Lydia didn't want to open them. She wanted to believe in the gilded cage she inhabited. The park view was perfect. The designer furniture was exquisite, and the promise of her perfect family was the only thing holding her together. She focused on the nursery, painting watercolor giraffes on the walls and folding soft, small clothes, pouring all her love and anxiety into preparations for her daughter. She told herself that once Sophia arrived, the cracks would heal. The distance would disappear, and the masterpiece of her life would be whole again. She was wrong. The foundations weren't just cracked, they were rotten to the core, and the entire structure was about to collapse on her. What do you think was Marcus's biggest mistake leading up to the confrontation? Was it the cheating, the financial fraud, or the condescension? Let us know in the comments. Don't go anywhere! Subscribe to witness the collapse of the gilded cage! The breakdown, the ultimate betrayal. The unraveling began with a piece of paper. It wasn't a lipstick-stained collar or a suspicious text message, but something far colder and more deliberate. A credit card statement. A secondary card in her name that Lydia had never seen before, mistakenly delivered to their apartment instead of his office. She picked it up from the mail pile, her heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Her hands trembled as she tore open the envelope. The charges were a map of a life she was not a part of. A weekend at a boutique hotel in the Hamptons, dinners at swanky Montauk restaurants, places he claimed were too stuffy for them. And then, the final, brutal entry. A charge from Genevieve Jewelers for $18,000. The description simply read, "Adeline pendant." Her breath hitched. The Adeline pendant. A week earlier, she had admired a similar necklace online, a delicate platinum chain with a single pear-cut diamond. She had shown it to Marcus, dreaming aloud of wearing it for their anniversary. He had scoffed at the price. "Be realistic, Lydia. We have a baby coming." Yet here it was. Purchased, but not for her. The air in the apartment, usually so fresh and sterile, felt dense and suffocating. She sat on their luxurious Italian sofa, the statement crumpled in her hand, waiting. Marcus walked in just after 9, smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint, cloying perfume that wasn't hers. He saw her on the sofa, saw the paper in her hand, and his charming smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Tough day?" he asked, loosening his tie, the picture of the tired husband returning to his sanctuary. Lydia didn't answer. She simply held up the statement. "The Gallardo deal must have been very successful," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You closed it at a jeweler, apparently." The mask fell. His face, usually so open and handsome, hardened into something cruel. "Snooping in my mail now? What's next? Checking my phone records? Following me to work? Who is she, Marcus?" Lydia's voice cracked, her composure shattering. "Who is the client you bought an $18,000 necklace for after telling me we had to be frugal for our baby?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "Oh, grow up, Lydia. It's business. You've been locked away in this apartment so long, you've forgotten how the world works. Don't you dare, she whispered, rising to her feet. Her body shook with a fury she didn't know she possessed. Don't you dare stand there and lie to my face. For months you have treated me like a stranger, like a nuisance. I am carrying your child, your daughter. I deserve the truth. You want the truth? He snarled, advancing on her. The truth is this marriage has been a dead carcass for a year. The truth is you are not the woman I married. You're tired, you're emotional, you've let yourself go. I need a partner, not a patient. Every word was a physical blow. Her vision blurred with tears, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not yet. So you found one. Maybe I did, he shot back. Maybe I found someone fun, someone ambitious, someone who doesn't spend their days painting cartoon animals on a wall. The cruelty stole her breath. In that precise moment, the intercom buzzed, a sharp, intrusive sound. Marcus smirked, pressing the button. Let her up! What did you do? Lydia asked, her blood running cold. Marcus, who is coming here? He didn't answer. He simply walked to the door and opened it. And there she was, a woman who was Lydia's opposite in every way. Younger, with platinum blonde hair, a dress that clung to her like a second skin, and a hard, predatory sheen in her eyes. Around her neck, gleaming under the hallway's recessed lighting, was the Adeline pendant. Tiffany, you're early, Marcus said, his voice dripping with false casualness. The woman, Tiffany White, glided into the apartment, her eyes sweeping over Lydia's pregnant figure with barely disguised scorn. I thought you would have handled this, she said, vaguely gesturing toward Lydia. Lydia felt as if she were outside her own body, watching a horror movie. Get out, she said, her voice a low snarl. Tiffany laughed. Your house, darling. From what Marcus tells me, you own nothing he hasn't paid for. That was it. The dam of Lydia's composure broke. A primal scream of rage and pain tore from her throat. She lunged, not at Tiffany, but at the large crystal vase on the console table, the one Marcus had bought from an exclusive gallery. She hurled it to the floor, where it exploded onto the marble. Get out! She shrieked, tears now streaming down her face. Tiffany recoiled. A theatrical gasp escaped her lips. Marcus, she's crazy, she's going to hurt me. What happened next unfolded in surreal slow motion. Marcus moved between them, his body a wall. He grabbed Lydia's arms, his fingers digging into her skin. Calm down, you psycho. You're going to scare her. Scare her! Lydia screamed, struggling against his grip. She is in my home! You brought your whore into our home! The word hung in the air, electric and vile. Marcus's face contorted with rage. Don't you ever speak to her like that again! And then it happened. He released one hand and swung. His palm connected with her cheek with a sound that seemed to silence the entire city. The force of the blow snapped her head back. She stumbled backward, falling over an ottoman. She crashed, her body twisting, the impact jarring every bone. A sharp, terrifying pain shot through her lower abdomen. She screamed, not for the sting on her face, but out of fear for her baby. She lay on the cold floor amidst the glittering shards of the broken vase and looked up. Marcus wasn't looking at her. He was turned to Tiffany, his arm protectively around her shoulders, murmuring soothing words. He was comforting the mistress while his pregnant wife lay on the floor, where he had just knocked her down. In that moment of utter devastation, a strange clarity pierced Lydia's pain. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a demolition, and Marcus Harrington had just handed her the detonator. With a shaking hand, she reached for her phone, her thumb clumsy as she dialed 3 numbers. Was this a deliberate act of violence, or a panicked reaction to Lydia's rage? You heard the audio. Share your judgment. Like and subscribe as Lydia begins her fight for justice, the fight for truth, the The legal battle. The sterile white of the hospital room stood in stark contrast to the chaotic explosion of emotions inside Lydia. For 12 agonizing hours, she was poked, prodded, and monitored. Every beep of the fetal monitor sent a fresh wave of terror and relief through her. The doctor, a compassionate woman with tired eyes named Dr. Riley, finally delivered the news. "The baby is fine," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You have some severe bruising, and we had a scare with some premature contractions, but they have subsided. She's a fighter, your daughter." Lydia closed her eyes, tears of gratitude escaping the corners. "And me? Physically, you will recover. We have documented the contusion on your cheek and the marks on your arms for the police report." Dr. Riley paused, her gaze steady. "Lydia, what happened tonight? This isn't just a domestic dispute. This is a felony assault, especially given your condition. You have decisions to make." The police had already been to the hospital. A stoic but not unkind officer, Detective Miller, had taken her statement. He had patiently listened as she tearfully recounted the night, her voice raw. He had photographed her face, the angry red mark of Marcus's hand already darkening into a bruise. When Jasmine arrived, one look at Lydia was enough to make her face crumple. She offered no platitudes or empty reassurances. She simply sat on the edge of the bed, took Lydia's hand, and held it. The quiet, unyielding support was more comforting than any words. "I'm leaving him," Lydia whispered. The words tasted foreign and yet absolutely right. "Good," Jasmine said, her voice choked with emotion. "We will figure it out." Lydia wasn't alone in this, but as the reality of her situation settled in over the following days, she felt profoundly lonely. She was discharged from the hospital and went to stay at Jasmine's small but cozy apartment. Her world had shrunk from a penthouse overlooking the park to a sofa bed in a one-bedroom in Brooklyn. Her first call was to a legal aid society. Marcus had been arrested that night, thanks to the 911 call and her testimony, but he had been released on bail within hours. He had immediately frozen their joint bank accounts, leaving her completely penniless. She had nothing but the clothes she wore to the hospital and the few items Jasmine managed to retrieve from the apartment before Marcus changed the locks. Her assigned attorney was an overworked, earnest young man named Benny Carter. He was well-meaning, but the sheer volume of his caseload reflected in his tired face. "Look, Lydia," he said during their first meeting in his small, cluttered office. "Marcus Harrington has hired Peterson and Associates, one of the top divorce and criminal defense firms in the city. They are going to paint you as an unstable, hormonal, pregnant woman. They will say you attacked his guest, and he was merely restraining you. The slap, they will allege, was an involuntary reaction to your hysteria." "But he hit me," Lydia insisted. Her voice trembled. "He knocked me to the floor. I was terrified for my baby." "I know, and I believe you," Benny said, sighing. "But believing and proving it in court against a legal team like that are two different things. We have no witnesses. It's your word against his and his girlfriend's. The 911 call helps. The hospital report helps. But they will try to bury us in paperwork and emotions until you are exhausted and willing to take a meager settlement." The picture he painted was grim. A long, ugly fight against a man with limitless resources, while she had none. Marcus held all the power, the money, the connections, the expensive legal sharks. He had built his golden cage, and now that she had escaped, he was determined to ensure she had nowhere to fly. The weeks that followed were a blur of fear and anxiety. She spent her days navigating the labyrinthine world of social services and legal paperwork. The nights were the worst. She lay awake on the sofa, one hand on her belly, feeling Sophia kick, and a cold dread washed over her. What kind of life could she offer her daughter? How could she protect her from a father who was capable of such cruelty and violence? Marcus's initial settlement offer arrived via email to Benny. It was an insult, a one-time payout of $50,000, and she would have to sign an NDA, drop the assault charges, and agree to supervised visitation with the baby. In exchange, he wouldn't sue her for damaging his reputation. "He is trying to buy your silence and your freedom," Benny said grimly. "This is a scare tactic." "It's working," Lydia confessed to Jasmine that night, her head in her hands. "Maybe I should take it. Disappear. Start over somewhere else. How can I fight him?" Jasmine placed her hands on Lydia's shoulders, her grip firm. "You fight him by standing up. You fight him by telling the truth. You are not the weak, hysterical woman he is trying to make you out to be. You are a survivor. You are a mother. You are collecting the stones he threw at you, and you are going to build a fortress." Lydia looked at her friend, then at her own hands. Jasmine was right. This wasn't just about money or divorce. It was about justice. It was about ensuring Marcus Harrington couldn't simply erase her and move on with his life, as if she and their daughter were nothing more than a bad investment he had written off. She thought back to her past long before Marcus. She remembered being a scholarship student, full of fire and ambition, determined to build beautiful things. She remembered a kindness shown to her once, a lifeline, offered by a quiet, reclusive benefactor who had been impressed with her final thesis project. A man who had told her, "Integrity is the only material you cannot buy. You have it. If you ever find yourself in a place where the world tries to force you to sell it, call me." Only once. She had never considered it. It felt like a lifetime ago. A dream. Making that call would be the ultimate admission of defeat, that she couldn't do it alone. But then she felt a strong kick from within her womb, a small, insistent reminder of why and for whom she was fighting. This was no longer just about her pride. With a deep, shaky breath, she picked up her phone. She scrolled through contacts she hadn't looked at in years, her finger hovering over a single name, Donovan Rexford. She had run out of options. It was time to make the one call she had promised herself she never would. What do you think Donovan Rexford, the reclusive billionaire, will do? Will he honor the years-old promise? Comment your prediction. Your likes and shares help us bring this story to the finish line. The grand entrance, the game changer. The courtroom was a study in beige and muted wood, a deliberately bland stage for the high drama it housed. It felt cold, impersonal, and utterly terrifying. Lydia sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands tightly clasped over her belly, now impossible to conceal beneath her simple maternity dress. Beside her, Benny Carter looked overwhelmed, his stack of files dwarfed by the mountain of leather-bound binders on the opposing table. Across the aisle, Marcus sat, looking every bit the aggrieved man. He wore a tailored navy suit, his expression a carefully calibrated mask of concern and regret. His attorney, Arthur Peralta, was a silver-haired man with a voice as smooth and dangerous as polished granite. And in the second row of the gallery, a silent, venomous spectator, sat Tiffany White. She wore a demure cream dress, a pearl necklace, not the diamond pendant, and an expression of petulant vindication. Every time Lydia's eyes accidentally met hers, Tiffany offered a small, pitying smile that made Lydia's stomach clench. The proceedings began, and it was immediately clear that Benny Carter's grim predictions were coming true. Peralta opened with a calm, convincing narrative that painted Lydia as a woman unhinged by pregnancy. "Your Honor," Peralta began, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "my client, Mr. Marcus Harrington, is not a monster. He is a man who, on the night in question, was faced with an unfortunate and volatile situation, a situation created by the plaintiff's unfounded jealousy and emotional instability. He described Tiffany White's arrival, whom he painted as a close business associate, as the trigger for Lydia's psychotic break. He described Lydia screaming, throwing a valuable vase, and lunging at Ms. White. Mr. Harrington did what any man would do, Peralta continued, gesturing to Marcus. He stepped between the two women to de-escalate. He sought to protect Ms. White from his wife's irrational rage. In the subsequent struggle, as Ms. Sterling thrashed and fought, his hand may have made contact with her face. It was an accident, a tragic, regrettable accident, in the process of restraining a person who was a danger to herself and others. Lydia felt the blood drain from her face. An accident? A struggle? He made it sound like she was the aggressor. Benny Carter objected, but his objections were timid, easily swept aside by the seasoned Peralta. When Lydia was called to the stand, Peralta's cross-examination was brutal. It wasn't aggressive, it was worse. It was condescendingly gentle, his questions designed to make her seem confused and unreliable. Ms. Sterling, you had been feeling particularly emotional in the weeks leading up to this incident. Is that correct? Quite common during pregnancy, as I understand it. I was upset because I believed my husband was cheating on me. Believed, Peralta repeated, letting the word hang in the air. You had no concrete proof, only suspicions? A vivid imagination? Perhaps. Ah, yes, the corporate account statement, filled with business expenses. Have you ever worked in high finance, Ms. Sterling? Do you grasp the nature of client relations? He twisted every one of her answers. Her fear was hysteria. Her rage, psychosis. Her discovery of infidelity was paranoid snooping. She felt herself shrink on the stand. The judge's impassive face offered no comfort. She could see how the narrative was taking hold. Marcus, the poor, successful husband burdened by a crazy pregnant wife. The low point came when Tiffany White was called as a witness for the defense. She walked to the stand with a practiced, mournful grace. She spoke in a soft, trembling voice, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. It was terrifying, she said, looking to the jury box. She lunged at me like a wild animal. Her eyes were glazed. Marcus saved me. He was only trying to protect me. If he hadn't been there, I don't know what I would have done. Lydia could feel the court's eyes on her, pitying, judging. She was losing. The truth was being buried under a mountain of expensive lies. As Tiffany stepped down from the stand, a wave of profound hopelessness washed over Lydia. Marcus had won. He would take her daughter, her reputation, her future, and leave her with nothing. Benny patted her hand, a gesture of defeat. The judge, Justice Vega, looked at her notes. Her expression was grim. We will take a 15-minute recess before hearing closing arguments, Justice Vega announced, her voice monotone. As people began to stir, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. The sound they made was unusually loud in the tense silence, causing everyone, including the judge, to turn and look. Two figures were framed in the doorway. The first was a woman in an impeccable charcoal gray suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a slim leather briefcase and moved with an aura of lethal competence. She was striking, but it was the man beside her who stole every last breath from the room. He wasn't tall or physically imposing, but he possessed a palpable intensity. Dressed in a simple, impeccably cut dark suit, sans tie, he had piercing blue eyes and a stillness that commanded attention. It was Donovan Rexford, the reclusive, media-shy technology billionaire, a man whose net worth was rumored to be greater than a small country's GDP, a man who hadn't been photographed in public in over a decade. Marcus Harrington, who had been smirking at his attorney, followed everyone's gaze to the back of the room. His smile evaporated, replaced by an expression of utter confusion. He knew who Donovan Rexford was. Everyone in the financial world knew. But what was he doing here? The woman in the suit walked briskly down the aisle, her heels clicking loudly with authority on the floor. She stopped at the plaintiff's table and placed a hand on Benny Carter's shoulder. "Mr. Carter," her voice was cool and clear, "I am Genevieve Dubois. I am taking over as lead counsel for Ms. Sterling, effective immediately. You will be compensated for your time." Benny stared at her, then at Donovan Rexford, who now stood silently by the back wall like a sentinel. And then at Lydia, his mouth agape. Lydia simply gave him a small, sad smile and a nod. The call had been answered. Ms. Dubois turned to the bench. "Your Honor, with your leave, I would like to request a brief continuance to catch up on this case. However, prior to that, I have already filed a motion to introduce new evidence that has just come into my possession. Evidence that will fundamentally change the nature of this entire proceeding." The courtroom, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell into complete silence. Arthur Peralta jumped to his feet, sputtering objections. Marcus was pale. A bead of sweat ran down his temple. Tiffany White stared, her mask of sorrow replaced by one of confusion and dawning fear. Justice Vega looked at the formidable Ms. Dubois, then at the enigmatic figure of Donovan Rexford, and then finally at Lydia Sterling, a woman who moments before had looked completely defeated. Now, for the first time that day, there was a flash of something more in her eyes. It wasn't just hope. It was steel. The rules of the game had just changed, and no one, least of all Marcus Harrington, had any idea of the checkmate that was coming. If you could whisper one thing to Marcus Harrington right now, what would it be? Comment below. Don't miss the final checkmate. Like and subscribe for the conclusion. The checkmate. The unflinching truth. Genevieve Dubois and Donovan Rexford's arrival was not an interruption. It was a seismic event. The 15-minute recess stretched into an hour as lawyers scurried. Clerks filed emergency motions, and Justice Vega held a tense private meeting in her chambers with Dubois and a sputtering Arthur Peralta. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. Donovan Rexford had taken a seat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind Lydia. He offered no words, only a single, firm nod. It was enough. It was the silent affirmation of the promise he had made to a brilliant, struggling architecture student years ago. After she won the Rexford Foundation Design Scholarship, he had met with her. He saw her portfolio designs, which were not just beautiful, but profoundly human. "Most people build walls," he had told her. "You design spaces that breathe. Never let anyone suffocate you." That memory, that long-forgotten validation, was a shield. Marcus kept shooting frantic, terrified glances between Rexford and Lydia, his mind clearly unable to grasp the connection. His entire strategy, his entire life, was built on a foundation of calculated power imbalances. He was the one with the money, the influence. The sudden appearance of a man who could buy and sell his entire firm with pocket change had shattered that foundation. "Ms. Dubois," Justice Vega said, her voice now sharp with renewed interest. "The court has granted your motion to introduce new evidence." "You may proceed." Genevieve Dubois stood, a picture of calm, lethal precision. She did not have a mountain of folders. She had a single tablet. "Thank you, Your Honor. The defense has painted a picture of my client, Ms. Sterling, as an unstable woman who concocted a fantasy of infidelity. They suggest Mr. Harrington is a victim of her hormonal rage. We are here to introduce a dose of reality." She turned to look at Marcus. "Mr. Harrington, you testified that your relationship with Ms. Tiffany White is purely professional. Is that correct?" "Yes," Marcus said, his voice a little too loud. "She is a key consultant for several of my high-net-worth clients." "I see. Dubois said, tapping her tablet. The large screen on the courtroom wall flickered to life. It displayed a series of financial charts, intricate and damning. Then perhaps you can explain to the court why, over the past 18 months, you have transferred approximately $2.8 million from your firm's discretionary bonus pool to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, a corporation of which Ms. Tiffany White is the sole director. Peralta leaped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a fishing expedition. My client's business is not on trial here." "On the contrary, Your Honor," Dubois smoothly countered. "It is directly relevant because this is not just about an affair. This is about a criminal conspiracy to defraud Mr. Harrington's partners and clients, a conspiracy financed by money he was stealing from his own firm. This was not an affair born of passion. It was a business arrangement. Mr. Harrington provided the stolen capital, and Ms. White laundered it through extravagant personal and real estate purchases." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Marcus's face had gone from pale to a horrifying shade of gray. Tiffany looked physically ill. Dubois wasn't finished. She swiped the screen. A new image appeared, a high-resolution photo of the deed to a luxurious apartment in Miami Beach, purchased 6 months ago. The owner, Tiffany White, paid in full. Cash. "This apartment was purchased for well over $1 million, Mr. Harrington. Ms. White, whose last declared annual income was $62,000, somehow afforded this property. Was this also a gesture of goodwill?" Marcus was speechless. He looked to Peralta for help, but his lawyer was staring at the evidence on the screen with an expression of pure horror. He had been duped by his own client. "Let us return to the night of the assault," Dubois continued, her voice dropping, becoming more intimate, more menacing. "You claim Ms. Sterling was hysterical, that she attacked Ms. White, and you were forced to restrain her. You claim the contact with her face was an accident." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "Your Honor, we would like to submit Exhibit B. This is a security recording from my client's neighbor's door camera, Mr. Hernandez. Coincidentally, the same client whose deal Mr. Harrington was supposedly closing all those late nights. The camera points into the hallway and has a high-fidelity microphone." She tapped the tablet again. The screen shifted to a grainy black and white video of the hallway outside Lydia's apartment. The audio, however, was crystal clear. The court listened in astonished silence to the entire argument. They heard Lydia's heartbroken questions. They heard Marcus's cruel, derogatory responses. They heard him bring Tiffany into the apartment. They heard Lydia's shriek of "Get out!" followed by the sound of the vase smashing. And then they heard it. The words that would seal Marcus's fate. Tiffany's voice, clear as a bell. "Marcus, she's crazy. She's going to hurt me." Marcus's voice growling. "Calm down, you psycho. You're going to scare her." Lydia's voice, full of pain and rage. "You brought your whore into our home." And then the sharp, sickening crack of the slap, followed immediately by a heavy thud and Lydia's cry of pain. There was no sound of a struggle, no wrestling, just a single, deliberate act of violence. The video continued. The court heard Marcus murmur, not to Lydia on the floor, but to Tiffany. "It's okay, babe. I've got you. She can't hurt you." The audio was a complete contradiction of the sworn testimony of Marcus Harrington and Tiffany White. It was recorded perjury. Genevieve Dubois let the audio play a few seconds longer before pausing it. She turned slowly. Her gaze swept over Marcus and Tiffany, then the gallery, and finally settled on the judge. "An accident, Mr. Peralta?" she asked, her voice dripping ice. "Or a calculated act of violence by a man defending his accomplice after being caught in a multi-million-dollar fraud? A man who would rather strike his pregnant wife than see his criminal enterprise interrupted." Arthur Peralta slowly sank into his chair. His face was ashen. He had been dealt a losing hand, and played it confidently, unaware that his opponent held a royal flush. The case was not merely lost, it was annihilated. And Marcus Harrington was not just facing a divorce, he was facing the complete and utter ruin of his entire life, engineered by the woman he had so carelessly tried to destroy. The courtroom, after the video played, was a tomb. The silence was absolute, broken only by a small, choked sob from Tiffany White. All the arrogance had drained out of Marcus Harrington. Left behind was an empty man, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. He stared at the blank screen, as if it could offer an explanation and an escape. But there was nothing there. Genevieve Dubois stood before the judge's bench. She did not gloat. Her demeanor was one of grim duty. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and clear, "in light of this evidence, we believe the facts are no longer in dispute. We have irrefutable evidence of felony assault, perjury, and substantial financial crimes. We formally withdraw any and all settlement considerations. We request the court grant summary judgment in the divorce proceedings, awarding full custody of the unborn child and all legitimate marital assets to my client, Ms. Sterling. Furthermore, we request this court remit the evidence of embezzlement, wire fraud, and perjury to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation." Justice Vega looked down from her bench, her gaze like shards of ice. She looked at Marcus, and for the first time, he flinched, unable to meet her eyes. "Mr. Peralta," the judge said, her voice dangerously low. "Do you have anything to say before I render judgment, Arthur?" Peralta slowly rose, a man watching his own career flash before his eyes. "Your Honor, given the startling nature of the evidence presented, the defense has nothing further at this time." It was the legal equivalent of a white flag of surrender. Justice Vega's gavel hit with a sharp crack that made everyone jump. "Summary judgment is granted in favor of the plaintiff, Lydia Sterling." Her ruling was swift and merciless. She granted Lydia full and sole custody of her unborn daughter, with Marcus Harrington having no contact until a full psychological evaluation was completed. And even then, any visitation would be strictly supervised and at Lydia's discretion. She granted Lydia the full value of the apartment, savings, and investment portfolio, the legitimate marital assets. Then, she went further. She imposed an immediate freeze on all known assets of Marcus Harrington and Tiffany White, pending the criminal investigation. She ordered Lydia to be paid a punitive settlement from the recovered funds of the Cayman Islands Shell Corporation, citing extreme emotional distress, physical harm, and malicious conduct by the defendant. Finally, she turned her attention to the criminal aspect. This court remits this entire file, including the verified evidence of financial embezzlement and the audio-visual recording confirming perjury and assault, to the district attorney. Mr. Harrington's bail is revoked, pending his arraignment on these new, more severe charges. Officers, take Mr. Harrington into custody. Two marshals approached a stunned Marcus. Reality finally hit him. He wouldn't be walking out of this courtroom. He looked at Lydia, his eyes wide with desperate, pathetic pleading. But Lydia did not look at him. She stared straight ahead, her hand resting on her belly, her expression calm and unreadable. She had endured his lies, his cruelty, his violence. She would not grant him the satisfaction of her gaze now. "Lydia, don't! Wait!" Marcus yelled as the marshals reached him, his voice cracking. "Lydia, please, we can fix this." As they put his hands behind his back to cuff him, his eyes darted to Tiffany. "Tiffany, tell them it was a mistake." But Tiffany White was already on her feet, backing away from the scene as if it were on fire. She was no longer a glamorous mistress or a cunning business partner. She was just an accomplice trying to save herself. Her own lawyer was already whispering frantically to her, no doubt advising her to cut a deal, to testify against the man she had helped. Her alliance with Marcus, built on greed and deception, had dissolved under the harsh light of consequence. Marcus Harrington, the master of the universe, the man who had everything, was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his shouts echoing down the marble hallway. The sound was not one of victory for Lydia. It was the sound of a chapter closing, a violent, painful chapter. Lydia finally allowed herself to take a breath she felt she had been holding for months. Jasmine was at her side, instantly wrapping her in a fierce hug. "You did it," Jasmine whispered. "Magnificent woman, you did it." Behind her, a quiet voice said, "You did it, Lydia." She turned to see Donovan Rexford. He wasn't smiling, but his intense blue eyes held a universe of respect. "I only opened a door," he said. "You were the one who had the courage to walk through it." "How can I ever thank you?" Lydia asked, her voice choked with emotion. "By building something beautiful again," he replied simply. "It's what you were always meant to do." As Lydia walked out of the courthouse, flanked by her friend and her benefactor, she felt the first rays of a sun she hadn't seen in a long time. The golden cage was a pile of rubble behind her. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it was hers to design. The new blueprint, the unbreakable foundation. 6 months later, the world was a different color. The oppressive grays of the courtroom and the cold blues of her old life had been replaced by the warm, buttery yellow of a sun-drenched nursery. Lydia stood in the center of a beautiful, light-filled Brooklyn brownstone, a home she had purchased with the first disbursement of the punitive settlement. It was not a palace of glass and steel. It was a place with character, with creaking old hardwood floors and a small backyard garden where she planned to plant roses and lavender. In her arms, she held her daughter. She hadn't named her Sophia. The name was tainted by the life she had left behind. Instead, she had named her Hope. Hope Sterling. A new name for a new beginning. Hope was a perfect little miracle, with a shock of dark hair and her mother's determined eyes. As Lydia gently cradled her, she reflected on the whirlwind of the past half-year. Marcus Harrington's fall had been swift and total. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he had pleaded guilty to wire fraud, embezzlement, and perjury. His assault charge was folded into the plea deal. He was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. His firm had fired him, his partners had sued him, and his name was now synonymous with disgrace in the financial world he had so desperately wanted to conquer. Tiffany White, as predicted, had turned on him. In exchange for her testimony, she received a lighter sentence, 2 years of probation, and the forfeiture of all her ill-gotten gains, including the Miami Beach apartment and every last piece of jewelry. The last Lydia heard, Tiffany was working as a hostess at a chain restaurant in Phoenix. The Adeline pendant, long since forfeited, was sold at a government auction. Genevieve Dubois had been a force of nature, ensuring every legal I was dotted and every T was crossed. The funds from the Cayman account were still being unraveled by forensic accountants, but it was more than enough. Lydia was financially secure for life, but she knew the money was not the real victory. The real victory was the peace she felt in this new home. It was the freedom to wake up in the morning without a knot of anxiety in her stomach. It was the joy of watching her daughter sleep, knowing she would be raised in a home filled with love and truth, not secrets and fear. She had returned to designing, at first just for herself, mapping out the house's layout, sketching ideas for furniture. Then, Donovan Rexford had approached her with a proposal. His foundation was funding a new community art center for underprivileged youth in the Bronx. He wanted her to be the lead architect. "I haven't worked in years," she had told him, hesitating. "You've been working your whole life," he countered. "You've just been designing the wrong things for the wrong people. Build this for me, Lydia. Build a space that breathes. And so it was. Her days were now a happily chaotic mix of motherhood and work. She had Hope babbling in a bassinet next to her drawing table as she sketched blueprints for a building made of reclaimed wood and soaring glass. A building designed to let the light in. There was a soft knock on the nursery door frame. It was Jasmine, holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. She had been Lydia's rock, her constant companion through every fear and every triumph. "Look at you, Lydia," Jasmine said, her smile wide as she looked at Lydia and the baby. "In a home you own, with a baby you adore, and a career you are rebuilding from the ground up. If someone had told me this was possible a year ago, I wouldn't have believed them either. But I learned something through all this," Lydia admitted. Her gaze drifted to her daughter's sleeping face. "Marcus thought my value was tied to him, to his money, to the life he provided. He thought by taking everything away, he would leave me with nothing." She looked around the warm, happy room, a space she had created with her own hands, her own taste, her own strength. "But he was wrong," she continued, her voice soft but certain. "He didn't take anything that truly mattered. He couldn't touch my integrity, my talent, or my capacity to love this little girl more than life itself. He tore down a cage, but he freed a person." In that moment, holding her daughter, surrounded by the promise of a future, she was designing herself. Lydia Sterling knew she was finally home. The masterpiece of her life was no longer a fragile portrait hung on someone else's wall. It was a vast, light-filled blueprint, and she was just getting started. The saga of Lydia Sterling is a heartbreaking reminder that the most beautiful facades can hide the darkest secrets, and that true strength is often forged in the most devastating fires. It is a journey from the silent desperation of a golden cage to the triumphant roar of a woman reclaiming her power, her identity, and her future. Her legal battle was not just about divorce or money. It was a fight for her truth and for the safety of her daughter. The moment those courtroom doors burst open, it was not just a billionaire who walked in. Justice walked in. Hope walked in. It was undeniable proof that no matter how powerful an abuser may seem, the truth, when armed with courage and unexpected allies, is the ultimate weapon. If her journey from silent victim to powerful survivor moved you, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to our channel for more real-life stories of resilience and justice. Your engagement helps us share these important narratives with the world. Thank you for listening.